Hi everyone and welcome to Back in Time Fiction, the YouTube channel on historical fiction and fantasy. Today I have the honor, the privilege of interviewing Matthew Harffy and Stephen McKay, two outstanding and best-selling authors of historical fiction, but also two champions of the genre. In 2022, Stephen and Matthew started Rock, Paper, Swords, a podcast for everything that falls under the banner of action and adventure in books, movies, TV and games. Oh, and they also talk about rock music from time to time. So hi everyone and welcome on Back in Time Fiction. It's my great pleasure to welcome Matthew Harffy and Stephen McKay today, the two geniuses who created the podcast, who host the podcast Rock, Paper, Swords. What is it now? Every week, I believe, we have one episode, and it's been
every
going
week
on
now. Yeah,
it's been going on since August, I believe.
July, I think.
July, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. July 2022, and now just recently we decided to go from one episode every 2 weeks to one episode a week, and maybe even more. Who knows? We'll get
maybe
excited.
Less,
or maybe fewer.
You never know. I guess it depends. It might be a shorter episode if I remember what you said on your last episode. Yeah. Which is great as well. Shorter but more of them. I'm very happy with this on my side. So. Before we start discussing about Rock, Paper, Swords, I just wanted to mention for the poor souls watching this video who don't know about Rock, Paper, Sword that you actually made the intro music that we heard just before you guys showed up in this video. So that's pretty amazing. Do you want to explain a little bit how it worked? How did you manage to create such a masterpiece of rock metal?
I'll let Stephen do that. He did most of the work on that. So
it was just I always sit and play my guitar at night, usually watching the TV, and I always come up with guitar riffs. So I came up with one for this, and I thought, well, that's quite fast paced, not too fast. Maybe we could just kind of shout Rock, Paper, Swords over it. So I recorded all the music for it, and I sent it to Matthew with me singing, basically just shouting Rock, Paper, Swords, Rock,
singing.
Paper, Swords. Yeah, shouting, screaming. And then Matthew, who is more of a singer than I am, he kind of toned it down and made it more commercial sounding.
that's how
that came about.
Yeah, and I just recorded the vocals and sent it back to Stephen. He mixed it all together, and there's a bit of Stephen singing on there as well in the chorus, doing some high.
No.
It's just you, Matthew.
Yeah, just a very me. It's a small scream at the end that I left in.
But that's what makes the whole song. It's the
it makes the whole thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, so for anybody watching this who doesn't know. Obviously, Stephen and I are both writers as well as podcast presenters or hosts or whatever you want to call us. But we also both have been in rock bands before, so we had this connection where Stephen has played guitar and I don't know with other instruments as well in bands, and I've been a singer in bands for different bands over the years. So we really came together over both the love of writing and historical fiction and rock music.
And rock music. It all makes sense now. So actually, that's a good segue to my next question. Can you explain maybe what is Rock, Paper, Swords? What is this podcast about?
Well, I'll take that one. This is fun because it's the first time we've been interviewed as the two of us.
Such an honor.
It's kind of interesting because you get the moment of like who answers the question, but. Yeah, so so we came up with the idea of the of doing the podcast because we were just chatting, and Stephen has just gone to working full time as a writer. So he'd been working part time for a while, and his day job, and I'd gone down from the day job to writing full time a few years ago. But Stephen had just done that early 2022, and we were talking about it. And I think he was asking me something about, what did I do with my days, and how had I felt how had the transition been from being part-time writer to being a full-time writer. And we were talking about that, and I just floated the idea of doing a podcast, and so we started talking about what we could do. Because I said, one of the things I said was that when you're working all the time at home on your own, it becomes quite lonely. And so one of the things that that maybe we could do is do a podcast which would give us a little bit of social interaction with each other. Talk to someone that's doing the same job and has the same things going on, and see how it goes. And as we've got this love of obviously rock music, which we mentioned before, and we've got the similarity, we're both writers of historical fiction and action and adventure type fiction, the sort of Bernard Cornwell style action and adventure. We decided, let's try to, what's our unique selling point? So we said our unique selling point is that we're both into rock music and we're both published successful writers. So thinking of what we could cover, we thought, okay, we can cover writing, action and adventure, historical fiction, history, and rock music. So
movies, games, anything that
movies, games, anything.
haven't done much games so far, right? I think
we had Stephen Saville on, who's written 4 games, and I wrote for a game as well. So we haven't particularly done a full episode.
We haven't got a full episode, but we've actually interviewed. I don't know whether we can drop it in here. But we've got other people lined up. And we've already interviewed Giles Christian, who's been doing games design as well as the writing.
So
we'll see who.
That's an episode coming soon, right? I'm guessing.
Yes, that is coming soon. Yeah,
next week I think it is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I know on my side the reason why I started my small channel Back in Time Fiction was because I couldn't actually find a lot of content specifically for historical fiction. You have a lot of reviewers, booktubers, podcasts that do mention historical fiction, but kind of on the side. You don't have a lot that is really focused on historical fiction, especially ancient historical fiction, more on the gritty, adventurous side. So when I saw your first post last year about rock paper sword, I was like, yeah, that's going to be fantastic. I think I listened to most of your episodes, not all of them. I know I haven't listened to the Lord of the Rings ones that you did last year, but besides this, I think I'm up to date. So last one I heard was Dan Jones. That was really good, quite fantastic episode. And
thanks.
Simmons Carroll was really good too, obviously. But the number one will, I think, remain for a long time, Bernard Cornwell. So let me ask you, how did it feel to interview the master?
It was quite surreal, because we both obviously are massive fans of Bernard. He is my main inspiration in wanting to write historical fiction. I mean, I was actually reading one of his Uhtred books, must be 10 years ago, no more than that, 12 years ago or something. And I finished it and I thought, I would love to do something like this. And that's when I ended up deciding to write Wolf's Head. It's inspired basically by the kind of things that Bernard's done. So to get to interview him, I was quite nervous before it. I don't really get that nervous now when we interview people, but Bernard, I felt a bit sick.
But it was funny, and it was funny because he was one of the first people we actually got on to interview as well. So because I'd been doing some videos, like YouTube live videos myself before. Speaking before we set up the podcast, which is one of the reasons why I reached out to Stephen and we started talking about it, because I did the first one I did of those during lockdown in the UK back in 2020 or something, was with Stephen, and we had a really good rapport. I mean, we've never actually met face to face apart from on Zoom.
Still
Stephen
not.
And I still yeah.
Too far
so
away.
Stephen lives up in Glasgow, and I live down in Wiltshire, and it's about a 6-hour drive or something between us. So we'd have to really be make a dedicated, really concerted effort to get together. And we've both got both working full time. We've got families and stuff. So I'm sure it will happen one day. But so far it hasn't happened. So, but we've chatted online for a while. And we've had a really good rapport, and so I decided let's see if we can do something together. But back to the thing of Bernard Cornwell. So he was one of the first people we had. So I had a few hangers-on or people that I'd already planned to interview on my sort of solo thing, which I then contacted and said, look, we're doing this podcast. Can you move over and do that? So they're the sort of the first guests we had were those people. They're great. We had some great guests, but Bernard was one of the first people we had on as a new guest just for the podcast. And we kind of just reached out to people randomly. We reached out to Bernard Cornwell saying, well, you've got a book coming out. We saw he had a book coming out. So we said, do you want to come on? And you mentioned the Lord of the Rings thing. So at the time we were kind of feeling around as well a bit, trying to work out what our niche was. And I think one of the reasons why we've ended up going to like once a week is because we've ended up doing so many interviews now that we've decided we're not getting any room to do our own talking about writing or history and stuff, so we need to slot in some extra time for that. But yeah, meeting Bernard Cornwell was crazy, and we were both super nervous beforehand. And I remember when we actually got onto the call eventually, he came on, he couldn't get his camera to work, and you get that horrible thing where you're on a Zoom call and there's some technical problem, and he's in America, we're in the UK, there's no way we could help him. And so you're sort of saying, well, have you tried clicking this button? Have you tried clicking that button? And in the end, you're thinking in the back of our minds, obviously we're both terrified that we're going to run out of time or that he's not going to be able to do it. So we said, look, it doesn't matter. We don't need the camera because it's audio anyway. So let's just go with it. But I think the first sort of 10 minutes or so, listening back, I'm pretty sure you can hear that he was quite nervous as well, and that he was struggling because he was fiddling, because obviously at his end, he's clicking all the buttons and probably speaking to his assistant or whoever's there with him going, I can't get the bloody thing to work. And so I think he was a bit distracted as well at the first, the first 5 or 10 minutes, which is...
And it was quite strange.
The technology's great, but it's so annoying when things like that happen. But it was fantastic.
But he said himself that he still gets nervous being interviewed and stuff, which you wouldn't expect. But the idea of Bernard Cornwell being nervous to talk to me and Matthew was weird.
I know, because at the end of the call, we actually had a little chat at the end, and we said, "Oh, thanks so much for coming on and everything." We were really nervous before, and he said, "Well, I was really nervous too."
But you can feel. I think I watched a couple of interviews with Bernard Cornwell, and you can feel he's not always, especially at the beginning, he's a little bit nervous. He doesn't really know maybe who he's talking to, and then he ends up joking and making fun of the interviewer. It's usually pretty cool.
I think there was a particular thing in that conversation that he just before we went online. So we had a little warm-up, chat, but literally just for 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, just to say hello before we went on, because we were very aware that, his time is precious, and we didn't want to, someone that maybe you know a bit, you can have a chat with, but we just thought we've got to get on to do the work. So, but just before, he dropped into conversation right at the beginning that he wasn't going to release his book that was planned, the new Sharp book, and it wasn't public knowledge. It hadn't come out at all. And he just dropped that bombshell. He said, I'm going to miss this deadline for the first time in my career. And we were like, oh my goodness. And so I remember we said to him, can we talk about it on the podcast? And he said, well, maybe, I'm not really sure what we can and can't talk about. And so in the podcast, for the first 10 minutes, I think as well, he was trying to work out whether he could say anything or not. And we didn't know. We didn't want to ask the question because we thought, well, it's not our place to kind of out him on the podcast about this problem. But then he brought it up and said, look, I'm going to miss this deadline. And then at this point, we're thinking, wow, this is like a scoop. We were planning to release the podcast weeks later. But then we thought we've got to get this out now while the news is fresh. But we were too scared of pissing off Bernard because he's Bernard Cornwell, and we don't want to annoy Bernard Cornwell. So we thought we can't just release this without telling him. So we contacted him and said, look, we're going to release on Friday. Here's the YouTube video. And he didn't reply, but that night he released a press release saying,
"Stole our thunder."
We're gonna miss the release. So I think he realized that we were going to steal his thunder, so he
pushed for the information to be released beforehand. I remember that I watched a live interview he did last year when the book was still supposed to be released on time, and the interviewer was really nice and asked him, like, do you intend to do a series on, I forgot the topic, so a new topic? And
series.
And Bernard Cornwell said, well, the thing is, I'm suffering from a condition called TBH, TMB. And TMB, and the interviewer was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And he's like, no, that means too many birthdays. I'm old. I don't want to start something. And that was really fun, the way he got her. So yeah, I hope one day I get to interview Bernard Cornwell on my channel as well. I'll reach out to him sometimes.
I tell you what, just reach out and see, because, well, this is kind of what we decided, and this is what I decided early on, right back when I started self-publishing my first book, was that if you don't ask, if you don't ask people, you're never going to, they're not going to say no if you don't ask. They're not going to say yes if you don't ask, right? So they can all, nothing, you don't lose anything to ask someone
as long as you're
more well known. Yeah, as long as you're polite, and as long as you accept if they say no, because sometimes
obviously
people could get quite hassle, can try to hassle people. You don't want to do that. So you reach out to someone, say, politely, could you come on my podcast, or can you give me an endorsement for my book? And you don't lose anything. And if they say no, then that's fine. You move on, and
we'll definitely,
and maybe go back a year or two later and ask again. Who knows? But
nice. I will definitely try sometime soon. Maybe in a few interviews. Then, because that's the thing. What do you do after Bernard Cornwell? So that was my next question to you. Like, how far can you go in historical fiction after you interview Bernard Cornwell?
Well,
so, Simon Scarrow.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so you interviewed both. So what is the episode that the two of you dream of recording?
Well, we can't mention who we've got coming on yet, just in case it doesn't happen. But we mentioned in the Dan Jones episode, he would talked about Duff McKagan and Slash, both like history.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So someone like that, rather, obviously you can't beat Bernard Cornwell and Simon Scarrow really in historical fiction. They're the top. So if you move it to music, who's the top in music? Guns N' Roses. We both love them, and whether you like them or not, Duff McKagan and Slash are huge superstars. So if we could get someone like that on, that also enjoy history and maybe even read historical fiction, I don't know, but someone like that would be like that's who I would dream of recording anyway.
Yeah, and I think from a writer, if we were going to carry on the sort of writing route, I think moving into different fields of not historical fiction but still action and adventure sort of writers, or just any writers. There's people like Lee Child that I would absolutely love to interview. Obviously, all his books are action adventure. J.K. Rowling, why not? Stephen King. I mean, there's G.R.R. Martin. I mean, there's some huge names out there. So I mean, if you're going to speak to Bernard Cornwell, why not aim for them next? So maybe we'll start reaching out to those guys. It's more difficult. The bigger the people are, the more difficult it is to get in touch with them. That's what we have found.
It's getting less and less it has less and less to do with historical fiction. So now you have to find an excuse like, oh, we heard that you might like rock music, Mr. Stephen King.
Yeah, well, we've
he does. He likes AC/DC.
Action. Yeah. We've packaged it up as the action and adventure historical, stuff. So it's sort of, we cover every base there.
That's true. So yeah, I was going to ask if you have actually met by now, but you answered that question already. Now, in the short term, so you mentioned Giles Christian will be on the channel, on the podcast, sorry. So any other names you want to drop here, or you prefer to keep it locked for now?
We're doing an episode tonight with David Gilman.
Ooh.
Yeah, right. David Gilman, he's written historical fiction and sort of action and adventure thrillers.
But he also wrote, my wife was impressed when I told her that he wrote Frost, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, Touch of Frost. And,
so I mean, that's huge and they're really good. So,
all right.
So we're talking to him later on today, and then we have got a couple of musicians coming on. But I don't know about Matthew, but I'm always a bit wary of talking about it until it actually happens. You don't want to tell everyone. We're talking to Bernard Cornwell, and then it gets cancelled, and you just look daft. So
we were terrified about mentioning Bernard Cornwell until after we'd done the recording, because we thought we just had luck that the next day he'd contact us and say, "No, sorry, I can't make it." And we'd look like absolute idiots, So, but I mean, we've got David Gilman lined up. We've got other writers lined up, and musicians and people. We'll see how it goes. We've talked to other people, like you mentioned, games. We've talked to people who are quite prominent in sort of games industry and things. But it's just trying to find the time to keep chasing those people as well, because sometimes they sort of say, yeah, come back to me, or get back to you, and then they don't. And how much do you chase?
Yeah. And so going back to Bernard Cornwell, and I think if I remember from the episodes and what you mentioned earlier too, he was one of your big inspirations to as a reader and as a writer, correct? Right? Is this would you say he was your biggest inspiration to start writing
pretty much
in historical fiction, at least?
So I mean, Stephen already mentioned that he was reading one of the Uhtred books when he started writing, and I started writing The Serpent's Sword, which is my first novel, back in 2001, believe it or not, before Uhtred was even a thing, even though I always get accused of copying Bernard Cornwell's Uhtred because it's set in the same place and similar sort of time frame. But I started writing that partly because I'd read mainly I'd say because I'd read the Arthurian trilogy that he wrote in the late 90s. So it was after reading those, and then I watched a documentary about Bamborough, and I used to live up in Northumberland, so I'd been to Bamborough Castle, which is Bebbanburg, and I decided, and I started to write about the 7th century. And then it was a couple of years later that Bernard Cornwell brought out the Last Kingdom novel, and I was so disheartened because it was so similar that I knew people were going to think that I'd copied him. So I didn't write for 7 years or 8 years. I put it away and just didn't write. And I joined a band. I formed a band, did all that stuff, and just gave up on the writing for years. And then, but in the end, picked it up. And
so Bernard actually inspired you to write, and then also stopped you from writing for 8 years.
Should have stopped the interview halfway through. Like, by the way, because of you, I couldn't write for 8 years.
Thanks a lot, Bernard.
The thing is, all I can say about that is that my advice to anybody in a similar situation is if you've got a good idea and you think that your story's worth telling, even if somebody releases a book that's very similar, just do it, because or if to keep writing, at least don't give up on it, because I do sort of kick myself and think I kind of missed the wave of historical fiction rebirth that there was in the early noughties, because I could have finished that book in like 2004, 2005, released on the coattails of Bernard Cornwell. I probably would have got a big better deal and got more money and everything if I'd done that, and I just didn't, because I was busy in life and I was worried that people would copy it, and I didn't have that conviction or that confidence. But since then I've been embraced by fans of Bernard Cornwell's and the readers of historical fiction. So
the similarities end with this one place. So
pretty much.
But I remember it took me 3 times to start reading The Serpent's Sword, and the first time what happened is that I had just read the first 7 Saxon stories by Bernard Cornwell, and I was like, I need to stop a little bit, that's enough. I want something different. What's next on my list? Serpent's Sword. And it started in Bebbanburg. I was like, all right, for later. So I left it for later. I think I reopened it maybe 6 months later, and just at this time I was actually trying to find a publisher for my first book, and I sent it to the publisher you have. So I don't know how to pronounce
Ares.
it. Ares, Ares. I don't know, like a head of Zeus, but it's Ares. And they were very nice, but then they rejected me. So I was like, no, in that case, I'm not reading. I'm not reading Matthew Harffy right now. I picked it up again 6 months later and devoured it in like 3 weeks, I think, which for me is pretty fast back then. So
great.
But yeah, Bernard Cornwell, I feel like especially the Warlord Chronicles inspired a lot of writers. The more I talk to historical fiction writers, the more I feel like this is the one book that got us all pumped. For me, that's the same. That's I think the first one that really got me into historical fiction was Robert Law, and then I read the Oath-Sworn saga, and I was like, I need to write something like this. Then I read the Warlord Chronicles, and I'm like, I'll never be able to write something like this. This is too good.
Yeah.
But that's the goal. That's the grail.
Yeah, they are the best.
Yeah.
It's at a whole different level. And even for him, I mean, all his books are good. He's a great writer.
Yeah,
so you pick up any Bernard Cornwell book, and you're guaranteed that it's a good book, it's a good read, you're going to enjoy it. But those 3 books, they really stand, and I think he said it that they're his favorite as well. I mean, they stand for me. I don't know what it is. Because maybe it's the only time that he's written fantasy in inverted commas, and maybe that freedom of just being able to write without having to worry about the history, even though it's very historically grounded, just gave him like a whole, it's like it gave him wings. And it's the only 3 books, as far as I can see, that are published by a different publisher as well, because they got rejected by his publisher, bizarrely, and he moved to a different publisher. And I think we asked him about this, didn't we? And his editor moved to a different publisher, and he went with her. And then
that's true.
Back.
I remember from the episode. But I also think one of the big reasons for what makes this trilogy special is the hate that Lancelot is like birthing into the reader. Like, everyone finishes this book or halfway through the books are like, I cannot stand this character. Really, it's a deep hatred for one character. This is a very strong emotion for a historical fiction novel. So pretty amazing.
I think twisting thing. I mean, it's genius to take trope characters and make them different. Make Lancelot, who's supposed to be this brave, guy, and everything, make him into some sort of cowardly character. It's brilliant. It's just really, really clever.
It can be dangerous too, because I know I only have 1 book out, and I did this changing one character that is usually portrayed as this very strong warrior, very serious, and I made him into a bit of a bastard. And some readers commented on it like, "Hey, why did you do this? This is
how dare you?"
Yeah, exactly. How dare you change this one guy? I was like, well, you need someone like that in every story. So what do you think we can do to make historical fiction more popular as a genre?
I'm not sure it needs to be more popular. I think you get like Bernard Cornwell again, the TV shows like The Last Kingdom. What's my dog?
Your dog?
Attacking the letterbox. You get the TV shows like The Last Kingdom, and the Warlord Chronicles are now been made into TV show as well.
Yes.
So there is a market there. We just, as writers, need to try and find those readers that he's got and kind of get them to buy our books. I don't think you need to make historical fiction bigger. You just need to find the readers that are already there and somehow get them to buy your books as well.
I think that there's probably different. I don't know about making it more popular, but I do think the historical fiction genre is too broad. It doesn't really make any sense. So you'll get
that's a fair point.
some lady somewhere, I'm kind of gendering this, but somebody who's not interested in action and adventure, fighting, whatever, will be looking for something completely different when they look for historical fiction than perhaps somebody who wants to read about action and adventure. And I know lots of women read Bernard Cornwell and our stuff as well. So I shouldn't gender, but there are people that are looking for different things. But historical fiction covers everything, and it feels like it's a too broader thing.
Yeah, well, you see that when you're trying to target your adverts. And historic, as you say, if you just pick historical fiction on Facebook as a target, it's a huge, it runs from maybe a woman's harem in ancient Egypt or whatever, right up to, say, 1970s Ireland or something, maybe books about the IRA,
Vietnam War or something,
which is completely different to us. So it has a very broad spectrum. So I suppose you have to kind of narrow it down a bit, don't you? And the categories in Amazon don't particularly help, because like one of the ones I've put my Druid books in is Celtic myths and legends, because he's a Druid. So to me, that fits perfectly to my books. But if you click in that category, the book covers that come up are like half-naked Scotsman with tattoos and the big claymore, and it's obviously a completely different book to mine. And that's, so if you see, those readers are not going to come to me and read mine and vice versa. So yeah, it's just finding the readers and targeting the right readers is the hard part.
Or they actually might actually get your book, and which is not great for you.
Exactly.
In the end,
Well,
yeah.
There's the other thing. There's the other thing as well, where you get people that won't pick up your book or don't want to pick up your book because of the cover or because of what they perceive it to be like, because they think it's going to be all just war and action and adventure and stuff, and there's nothing else in it. And I'm sure there are some stories like that. But then I get, people that for example, my mum, I don't think she would go and actively seek out this type of book, but then she reads mine and goes, actually, it's much more. And she's got like friends from church that she's ended up, so we're talking like, ladies in their 70s, whatever, that are reading my books and love them, because there is romance and there are relationships, and the children, it's like a saga as well. There's stuff going on, so it's not just fighting and action all the time. There's you've got to have the threads of the family that tie it all together, or else it's meaningless. You just got characters rampaging around killing each other. That's not a story. You still have to have the action, but to make it exciting, I think. But you've got to have all of those threads of sort of familial ties and everything, which is what some readers want. So they're pleasantly surprised, and then say, I wish, I love your books, but to get those people to actually read your book is incredibly difficult. That's
the most difficult. Yeah, it's just, I feel like since I published my book, I've been chatting with a lot of readers who are heavily into fantasy. So you have a lot of fantasy readers, and you have this dynamic in the fantasy genre, like I should say genres, because it's like historical fiction. It's really broad, right? You have like a epic fantasy, soft fantasy, whatever, grim dark and everything. So and you have this amazing dynamics between readers and writers that maybe we don't see as much in historical fiction. And I'm a bit jealous when I see how easily they tend to communicate together. And I'm like, it would be great if historical fiction had this dynamics as well. But at least we have some amazing podcasts. So, which is
the fantasy thing is definitely true, because the likes of David Gemmell and George R.R. Martin, they're very similar to our books. It's the same basic backdrop. They've just made theirs up, really.
And they've added a dragon or two.
They've added dragons and the food they eat. They've maybe made it up or whatever, whereas we have to research it and use the real stuff. But the actual meat of the story is usually basically the same. So that would be one way to, if we could kind of get those fantasy readers to try our books, you'd probably find that they'd enjoy them just as much.
There's actually an anecdote about that. So I was mentoring a guy a couple of years ago during the lockdowns, a writer in Canada who's doing historical fiction, a guy called Robin Izzard, and actually his first novel is out there, so if anyone wants to look for it. And I can't remember the name of the book though, so sorry. Guild of Salt something, but anyway. But yeah, it's historical fiction, but he was part of a writing group, or he is still, I think, and everyone else was into fantasy. And he asked them to read as their monthly book one of my books. I think it was Wolf of Wessex. And they read it, and they didn't like it. Most of them didn't like it because, one of the things they said they didn't like, which I remember, and I don't, obviously he's not here to tell me exactly, to remind me exactly, but it was something about the names of the characters. All the names are historical names, right?
Yeah.
And these are fantasy guys, and they said, we wanted names that actually meant something. So like the name, they didn't like the names because in fantasy everyone's called, like, I don't know, Matthew Skullcrusher or something, or your name says something about. But real people in real life, they don't go around. They're not called Fastblade, Harffy Fastblade or something. It's just well, maybe some of them are, but they're it's not. They're not necessarily people wandering around in the
Ragnar hairy trousers.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
but it was a funny comment.
That's quite odd to. Yeah, that's a very odd comment. Like the reason why we didn't like it so much is just the names you chose.
Maybe there was other reasons too.
No, but
it wasn't long enough, probably.
That's true what you said. Like the number of people who started Game of Thrones before it became a big hit, and maybe 10, 15 pages after starting went like, I don't understand what period of England history is this. Even the TV show, the first episode at the end, before they start bringing dragons, it could be historical fiction. So there is a lot in common there. So, and I know I had a couple of reviews on YouTube about my book, where from reviewers who usually review fantasy, and they always say, I mean, both of them said like, it's not usually what I would read, but it feels a lot like fantasy without all the magic. So you should give it a try. Yep. So that would be a nice. So fantasy readers who watch this video, give a try to our books. I swear it's not so different. The names are different. That's it. There's no magic.
But even there's even magic. They just they all the characters believe in magic. So who's to say there isn't magic? Back in 7th century, I mean, people definitely believed in magic. So you got
magic and ghosts.
Yeah, that's right. My second book is called The Cross and the Curse, and Beobrand, the main character, is cursed by a witch, and he absolutely is convinced that he's cursed because he believes in magic. And,
all right, you hear that, fantasy readers? There is magic. Might not be actual dragons, but there is magic.
But you see, David Gemmell never used really dragons, or he had a bit of magic and shapeshifters and stuff like that, but not as overt as someone like Terry Brooks.
Yeah. Well, and you do like have fantasy with heavy magics, like let's say the Witchers. I don't know if you've read the Witcher series.
No, I've played the games.
Yeah, well, you know how it feels, right? It could be historical fiction with just a lot of heavy magic. So yeah, here you go. Now, where do you stand on the debate? I know you mentioned it with the Dan Jones the other day, but on the debate, history versus fiction in your writing, what is more important, entertaining or being accurate to history?
I think you have to. It's kind of almost equal, but I would say entertainment for me. As long as the reader enjoys the story, that's the main thing, because it can be as accurate as possible. But if it's a rubbish story that nobody likes, then they're not going to they're not going to buy your next book. So you have to entertain them first, but you have to make sure it's accurate, or as accurate as it can be within the storyline anyway, whilst keeping it exciting.
Yeah, my mantra is always story over history, and the second part of my mantra is authenticity over accuracy. So I think you can make the world feel authentic without you know it's not going to be accurate, because we're not historians, right? We don't know everything. We haven't been to 7th century Britain, so we can only rely on as much as we can read and take in. So the rest of it is guesswork. But if you can make it feel believable and authentic, I'm always surprised actually by my readers that leave reviews saying about how much research I've done and how it's very clear that the research really sort of because I feel like I've not researched enough at all and I don't really know what it was like, but I think I managed to conjure up an authentic feeling, and I think against that you then create a really exciting story. I think the story is definitely paramount. But tell people where you've fudged the history. If you know you've fudged the history to make the story better, tell them in a historical note. Well,
that's what I did yesterday. I wrote the author's note for the back of my new book about King Alfred, and I just basically mentioned a couple of places where I know what happened, but I thought it'd be more exciting to do it slightly differently. So I've slightly changed a couple of things, but I've admitted it, and I don't really see that there's any harm in it, even if you don't admit it, because it is historical fiction, and you want to interest and excite the reader rather than just giving them some dry historical thing that they could just go and read a history book if they wanted to learn about the exact events that happened.
All right, sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say, this is the trouble having three people on the call. You wait for a break and you speak at the same time. But I was just going to say that the reasons for telling people is so that they don't pick you up on it, so they don't pick you up and say, "Oh, you're an idiot. You didn't know what you're doing," so they don't feel cheated. I think that's the main reason for telling them.
And so let's put a pin on the King Alfred new book, because I want to mention that in a minute. But as far as history versus fiction is concerned, I also feel like even if we try to be very accurate, some historians will find new theories or new proofs that will destroy our accuracy later on. So you might have been accurate at some point as a fiction writer, and then 10 years from now, and the joke is that this person started studying this topic because of your book. So
that's true.
A bit of a betrayal there, but
that's a good point, because a lot of the research books we're using, they might be 20, 30 years old. So we're reading it thinking, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'll use this in my book. And then it turns out that he was wrong. That over 20 years later.
It's creating that sense of authenticity, isn't it? It's just making sure that everything feels believable and feels real, and using real life experience, sort of trying to transpose that back in time. And
so you're always going to get people telling you you're wrong anyway. I get pulled up by a guy on Facebook over the use of the word Celtic. And he was sending me a message saying, you shouldn't be using this word. There were no Celts. It was that's a wrong term to use. I've never actually used that term in any of my books. He'd picked it up wrong because somebody else said it and he was having a go at me. But that just shows you that certain people think certain things are wrong. They'll go against the grain, and it's really important to them. So you're always going to be wrong in somebody's eyes anyway.
I know, recently I had a very interesting review. Very nice, though. I'm not complaining about the review itself, but with the reviewer telling me in the comments that, telling the future readers in the comments that I used stirrups in my story, while stirrups didn't exist back then. And actually they
might have
did.
done in China. Yeah.
No, but they did.
Yeah,
they did.
exactly.
They actually existed. And this person knows a lot, probably more than me, on the topic of ancient China. But I did my research and I can't reply in the comments because it doesn't look good, right? So I wanted to say no.
But they don't let you anymore.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
class, they don't. Yeah, that's true.
Amazon don't let you reply now.
Well, it's probably for the better. They don't let you. And
absolutely.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say though, one of the history that became very important because of the book is actually King Alfred, right? He wasn't very known, I guess, before Bernard Cornwell picked him up and made The Last Saxons. Did you know about him in UK before?
Yeah, we studied about him at school and everything here. He's called the Great. He's our only king that's called the Great.
Oh, you have two.
Alfred. Who's the other one?
Canute the Great.
He's not. He's called
nobody calls him that.
Nobody calls him the Great, and he's not English either. So you're on dodgy ground there. He's Danish,
all right.
Sorry.
The French guy is not going to talk about this.
Anyway, as far as I'm aware, he's the only great king. Yeah, we learn about him at school and about he's quite a well-known figure in British history. To Stephen to actually talk about the book and the research thing.
So yeah, I was going to mention, I was going to say actually that, but he became even more famous and important because of historical fiction, right? And to the point that now Stephen has decided to jump ship and be traditionally published with a trilogy. Is that correct?
As far as I know, that it's not actually been set in stone. I've signed a contract for 3, but I think it's open-ended that if they sold really well, they could probably do the next, Edward's part in the story or whatever.
All right. So can you tell us more about when is this happening? When are we going to read this first book? Or how did it happen?
Hopefully the first book will be out next January. I just sent it to Canelo, the editor, yesterday. They approached me, actually. I'd reviewed one of their books and the editor, Kit, was really nice, and he emailed me asking if I'd ever be interested in working with a publisher. They'd love to, publish me. So I said, well, okay, what would you like me to write? Do you have any ideas? And he said, well, I'll have a think about it and I'll come back to you. And he came back with this suggestion for maybe writing something about King Alfred. And the funny thing was, he never even realised that Alfred was in Cornwell's books, or that he'd never seen the TV show either. So wow. I was a bit worried, because I'm saying, well, you do know that everybody's going to compare it to Bernard Cornwell. But once I started researching it, I don't think Bernard's kind of representation of him is particularly realistic, because in Bernard's books, he's a kind of small, skinny guy who's not much of a warrior and really poorly and stuff like that. Whereas the real King Alfred was a warrior. He would stand in the front line, because they all had to back then. And he would fight alongside the rest of them. So he must have been a pretty hard guy. So that's kind of where I've taken it. He's a different character completely to Bernard Cornwell's version. So you can't really compare the two. Those early years of his kingship and when he was Atheling the Prince, they're really, really interesting. The truth is actually stranger than a fiction novel. So I had a lot to work with there, so I just kind of stuck quite closely to what his life was like.
So it's going to be
what Stephen really wanted was to he couldn't.
Sorry.
He couldn't stand the fact that I was getting compared to Bernard Cornwell all the time, so he wants to be compared as well. He wants the fans to sort of jump on his books as well. So this is not as good as Bernard Cornwell.
This is the next Bernard Cornwell.
Yeah. Well, that's probably what will happen. But somebody will say, no, this is not anything like King Alfred, because Bernard Cornwell's is totally different. But there's not much you can do about that. Hopefully people enjoy the story.
Plus, there are really two King Alfreds in Bernard Cornwell's story. There is the novel one and the TV show one. They are quite different as well, right? The actor portrayed him like Dave Dawson, I believe the name. I'm not sure. It's absolutely amazing. That he's probably
he's a really good actor.
He's probably one of the best characters in the TV show. Whereas in the book, he's maybe not as strong. I feel. So that's going to be. So I'm looking forward to see how different is your King Alfred. That will be super interesting. So looking forward to January 2024.
Yeah,
hopefully.
So,
and do you have any advice to writers out there who want to get as much success as you in the future? Doesn't have to be just me, just any writer in historical fiction.
Well, the first advice for any like aspiring writer is just finish what you're writing. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. And it sounds silly to say, but there's a lot of people that say, "Oh, I want to write a novel," and it's like, "Go on then." And they say, how can I get this published? How can I do this? How can I do that? And often you speak to them and they've written like 5 pages, and you say, "Well, go first. You go away and finish the thing." So the most important thing really is to finish it. So I think once you've finished it, you can then edit it and improve it. But once you've done all of that stuff, sorry, which is obviously a requisite if you want to actually publish, then I think engage with other writers online. I think social media now, and like we're talking now on your channel, I think it's a healthy approach is to look at other historical fiction writers as your colleagues as opposed to your competitors. I know some writers are very much everyone else is a competitor, whereas I think all 3 of us are writing historical fiction novels that fit probably in the same slot on somebody's bookshelf. They've only got a finite amount of time, but they've got a lot more time to read than we have got to write, or than we'll be able to write. We could write 1-2 books a year or whatever. They can read a book a week, or even some people are reading like a book a day. So I think lean on other people, as in engage on social media, share other people's posts, get them to share yours, and reach out and get help from other people.
Just as you've done with us, really. It's as long as you're polite and friendly and you're not pushy or anything like that, because there's nothing worse than getting an email from somebody who's really pushy.
Yeah, we both get that, and I think maybe you might have had that. But if you get as you get more successful, you've got more books out there, you'll every now and again you'll get somebody, and there'll be a writer, an aspiring writer, or somebody who's just starting out, and they'll ask, they'll request something like an endorsement or to come on the podcast or whatever it is, something which is something that takes you as the writer time out of your day to help them out. And sometimes you just haven't got the time, and so you have to go back and say, "I'm sorry, I just can't do it. I haven't got the time at the moment." But they'll keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, and it just becomes tedious, and all it does is turn you off to them. So that's a lesson to everybody. If you're going to do that, ask politely. If you get a no, take it
just leave it
politely as well, and take it in your stride and just move on, because then you can go back later and say again, a year down the line, say, "Oh, I know you couldn't last year, but could you read my 3rd book or my 2nd book," or whatever. And the people aren't going to feel pissed off with you and disgruntled if you come back. But
I remember when I was just starting out, I was friends on Facebook with a few guys like Ben Kane and Robert Lowe and Anthony Riches and guys like that who I was a fan of. I'd read all their books, so I was a genuine fan of theirs. And I asked loads of them if they would give me an endorsement, and some of them just completely ignored me, and some of them were really kind of friendly, but they all said no. But the ones that replied in a kind of polite, friendly manner, it stuck in my head that these are nice guys, and I was thankful. Whereas the ones who just completely ignored you, and they've read your message, that to me that's just rude, and it just put me off them completely in every way. So on both sides of the fence, you have to be polite. You always be polite and friendly, and don't be pushy either way.
And another thing, it's interesting because both Stephen and I have been doing this now for a few years, and it's a very, very small world.
It is.
And when we started out, we would never imagine that we would be speaking to Bernard Cornwell on a Zoom call 8-9 years or whatever later down the road. But you do, and you meet the people that are in this world at events or online or whatever. So politeness is key, because you know, who knows, you know, Baptiste, you could become hugely successful 10 years from now. You might be 10 times bigger than us, or 100 times bigger than us. We don't know. So be polite and nice to everybody, because it's better to be friends with people that are successful than to create enemies. So I think that's a lesson there to learn from both sides. Well,
for now, I didn't receive many requests for endorsement or anything, so I'm not there yet. I mostly receive emails from marketers and promoters who want to promote my book here and there. But, no, not yet for the endorsement side. So
I was incredibly lucky that listening to Stephen saying that everyone said no to him. I was really lucky. I got some big names to say yes for the Serpent Sword, which I don't really know how I managed it. People ask me how you managed it. I say I just asked, so I don't know. But Angus Donald, who I know, I just saw you just released a video with him. He was, I think, the first person to say yes and endorse the Serpent Sword, and that was great. And I've met him a few times since then, and he's a lovely guy. And we're friends friends in real life. I've met him. He came recently, went out for a meal with him just a couple of weeks ago. So
you were very lucky with that, weren't you? Because I even endorsed the Serpent Sword.
And you endorsed it. That's true. Yeah,
that's true.
But you probably remembered getting all the rejections. So when I said maybe you endorse it, you're like, oh, okay.
It's time for payback. So no, on my side, I got one endorsement from the biggest specialist of the time period I'm writing about. So that felt pretty huge.
That's good
for a first book, but really not from the writing side. Yeah, so it does feel quite amazing when peers or people we respect in that industry reply back first. Just reply back politely and positively, then it's even better. So quite lucky on that side.
I think what people don't realize sometimes when they're starting out is just how much time is taken up for a full-time writer, or if you're not full-time, you're part-time, it's the same. You still spend loads of time, not just on the writing and the research, but on all of the rest of it, the social media and everything else. So incredibly busy. So it's very difficult. And that's one of the problems with our industry is a book is a chunky thing, and it takes, like you said before, a fast read for you because you're busy is 3 weeks for a novel. So if somebody says, can you endorse this novel, and you feel like, well, okay, I've actually got to read the novel, that's a huge chunk out of your time. So you need, it's a big commitment.
So you're always worried that it won't be very good, and then what do you say? Especially with a new author.
That's true. All right. So, but basically the big tip is reach out to other writers, to reviewers, readers, and all of this.
But not to us, because we're too busy.
Exactly. Like that was the last interview Rock Paper Sword is going to give as the interviewee. So again, an honor. So Stephen, you are going to release a trilogy, about King Alfred. How about you, Matthew? What are you working on at the moment? What's next?
Well, I'm actually working on something completely different. It's still historical fiction, but a totally different period and a totally different region, country even. And but I don't think I'm quite ready to spill the beans publicly just yet.
Fair enough.
If people watching are really, really interested, then they can become a patron on Patreon, and I am spilling the beans there. So
surely everybody that listens to Rock Paper Swords already knows, Matthew.
They might.
You mentioned it,
because I think I've mentioned it. Maybe have I? Well, then they can go listen to Rock Paper Swords.
Exactly. Now they have to listen to all the episodes until they hear.
That's it. Yeah,
I'm sure I've mentioned it more than once.
Well, I'm sure you have. I keep trying to keep it secret, but you keep on sort of outing me. But anyway, if they want to find out, I'll even post snippets of stuff on Patreon. So there's bits there. But soon it will become clear.
We'll hear about this soon. All right, then last question, and I'm very happy to ask this question to you guys. What are you listening to at the moment?
Oh,
so for once you are being asked this question.
Well, I've got the new Enslaved album that just came out this week, which is, they're not black metal anymore, but they're kind of Viking progressive metal, and also a band called Sarcoptes, which is proper kind of black metal. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff I listen to when I'm writing, because it's really just screaming and really fast blast beat drums, and it's almost white noise, so it helps me focus and escape the world around me. headphones on, black metal blaring, and I can enter this new realm.
That's interesting. I can't feel it in your books though. I don't feel the black metal per se, right? So
I suppose that's a good thing.
I guess. I mean, if you're writing about ancient Celtics, sorry, shouldn't say Celtic, a Druid story, you shouldn't have too much black metal in it.
Probably not. It depends what it's like, but it's basically just a noise to block out distracting noises, like car horns, car doors closing outside, people shouting as they walk by, just some kind of noise to avoid that.
No lyrics, so you don't get...
Well, there is lyrics. There are lyrics, but you can't understand them because they're screeching.
How about you, Matthew?
Yeah. So for the writing side of things, so the putting music on just to drown things out, I'm listening to something which may or may not be a clue as to what I'm writing. The soundtrack of the Paramount TV series 1883.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to say whether that is or not
related
a clue as to what I'm writing, but you can draw whatever conclusion you like there. And in terms of music, like rock music or singing stuff, I've actually been listening to loads of Elvis Presley, because I just saw the movie Elvis, and it kind of made me want to go back, and maybe want to go and look at some of the stuff. And I listened to for a day afterwards, because I've always been into Elvis. I mean, he's such an incredible showman, but I've never been a huge fan of. I've listened to all of his stuff, and he's got big breadth of material, but listening to some of the live stuff, and they've got a deluxe version on Amazon Music of I think it's the way it is, or the way it was. I think it's the way it is was the live film from Vegas he did back in 71 or something like that, very early 70s, and he's basically at the peak of his career. It's before he went fat and terrible and then just died. And so he's great, but they recorded. So I realized that obviously they recorded loads of gigs, and then they edited together for the video, because it's a film, the best bits. But they've now just output everything they recorded, and so it's all the set from one gig, and then all the set from another. You hear him doing the same spiel for the same songs, and it's quite interesting from a performer's perspective to hear the setup and he's got his little jokes that he tells in the band. They do the little bits, and he's got his little gig, his little moments. But it's incredible. The thing I was most surprised about is that he was performing. So it says it's 15 songs or something, and it says introduction gig or something. Then it's dinner gig, and then it's midnight concert. So he was doing at least 2, maybe 3 concerts a day, and each concert was full on, an hour and a half of him proper rocking out. So no wonder he burnt out. And took loads of drugs and ended up just falling apart, because he did 800 gigs or something in the end in Vegas. I mean, it's absolutely mad.
Had to have something to keep going. So I guess it makes sense. I haven't watched the movie yet. So is it good? Yeah,
definitely worth a watch. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's pretty incredible performance from what's his name, Austin, the guy who does Elvis in it. He's especially. I mean, he's done some of the singing. He's done some of the vocals. I think quite a lot of the vocals is him. The live stuff, obviously, they're mixed with bits of Elvis live to sort of make it just work. I'd say the singing is good, but it's they could have just used Elvis's voice for the singing. It would have probably worked just as well. But the movement wise, he's incredible. I mean, he really sort of embodies. He's got the movements down pat, and his spoken voice is incredible, and he acts. He's a great actor. So yeah. Good.
All right, might be worth checking later when
you should check out Lords of Metal as well on Netflix.
I
watched that last night. Have you seen that?
No, how do you call it? Sorry,
Lords of Metal.
Lords of Metal. Yeah. No, I haven't. But I live in Japan, so we don't have the same content on Netflix. Right. So I'm not sure.
You'll probably get this, because I know they like heavy metal in Japan. So it's like 2 teenagers trying to start a metal band. It's a comedy.
They have amazing indie metal, indie. They have amazing indie everything in Japan. Indie jazz, indie rock, indie hip hop, all of this. So I'm sure they do enjoy metal as well. I'm just not sure if it's on Netflix.
No.
So that's it. All right, I think we went very far from historical fiction there. But I'm still
this is what we do in the podcast.
Exactly. That's perfect. So anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you very much for spending so much time with me, guys. I look forward to reading your next books and all of those in between that I haven't read. Once again, thank you very much for showing up. I hope that was fun for you. And then I'll let you go to your next interview, this time for Rock, Paper, Sword.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Baptiste.
My pleasure.
Good luck.
Yeah, you too. Talk soon. Bye.